You've entered Bookstorm. Your favorite authors are here to dive down deep into their best-selling books. Stay tuned to brave the storm.
Well, welcome back to Bookstorm Podcast listeners. I'm Kristen Civiletto, and with me is Julia Noel Rose. And we've got you all over the world. We're so excited. We've got you in 102 countries and territories, all 50 states. And we know why. It is because we are bringing you the very best authors who are writing today. And today is no exception. We are absolutely thrilled to welcome critically acclaimed and New York Times bestselling author, Laura Lippman. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me, y'all.
We are so excited because, first of all, we don't get many reporters turned authors on the show, and that's always a cool background fact. I want to tell our listeners just a little bit about you and your background. I think this is your 20th novel that we're here to talk about today, Murder Takes a Vacation. Is that right?
It's actually a little more than that. It gets confusing, but okay, so there's 30 books overall, but you minus the children's book, minus the 2 short stories, collections. So it's my 26th novel.
Oh, that is fantastic. Well, we are loving it because we've got a character that we've seen before, and I know you'll probably tell us about that in just a minute. But I want to tell our listeners how you've also had a career as a reporter. In fact, 20 years and 12 years at the Baltimore Sun. You began writing novels while you were working, publishing books, and it sounds like you may have left reporting recently and now you're writing full time. Is that true?
I mean, I've now been working as a novelist longer than I worked as a journalist because I started publishing in 1997.
Right.
So that's 28 years ago. And I only spent 20 years in journalism. There's an overlap there, which is how it makes it possible without me being like 102. But yeah, I got really lucky because when I left the newspaper in 2001, and at the time, nobody really saw where newspapers were headed. No one saw what would happen as a result of Craigslist and the loss of revenue and how newspapers would just shrink and shrink and shrink. I got out because it was right for me to get out. I had a contract that was going to allow me to write fiction full time, but I thought newspapers would go on forever. And it looks like I, made the right transition at the right time.
Yeah, you sure did. And we're glad you did. I want to tell our listeners, I mentioned that you are critically acclaimed, but you have won some amazing awards. And I just want to mention a couple of them. You've been awarded the Edgar, the Anthony, the Agatha, the Seamus, the Nero Wolfe, Gumshoe, and Barry Awards. Very impressive. You've also been nominated for the McCavity and Hammett Award. And you've been recognized as the author of the year with the Maryland Library Association in your genre. And I think it's pretty amazing. And we are thrilled for you for this new book. I think Julia's got a copy of it. We want to show our listeners who are on YouTube what it looks like. Murder Takes a Vacation, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Um, but Julia, would you want to give us a little background on the book,
Yes,
maybe?
I was going to say that's my job.
Yeah.
So I would love to give our listeners just kind of an overview, a summary of, this book that we got the privilege to read ahead of time and that they're, going to be picking up in the next day or so. I won't give away any spoilers. And if there's anything you want to add at the end, please do. So Mrs.
Yeah, go
Blossom.
ahead.
Mrs. Blossom has a knack for blending into the background, which was an asset during her days assisting private investigator Tess Monahan. But when she finds a winning lottery ticket in the parking lot, everything changes. She's determined to see the world that sometimes she feels is passing her by. So Mrs. Blossom booked a cruise through France on the MS Solitaire, and she did not expect to meet a man named Alan on her transatlantic flight. He's the first man who sparked something inside her since her beloved husband had passed 10 years earlier. She also didn't expect Alan to be found dead 24 hours later in Paris, a city he wasn't even supposed to be in. Now Miss Blossom doesn't know who to trust on board the ship, especially when a mystifying man, Danny, keeps popping up around every corner, always present when things go awry. He's convinced that Alan was transporting a stolen piece of art and that Mrs. Blossom knows more than she let on regarding both the artifact and Alan's death. So Mrs. Blossom's questions only increase as the crews sail down the sign. Why does it feel like she's being followed? And most alarmingly, why do these mysterious men keep flirting with her? So let's dive in. And actually, one of my first questions for you is kind of on that note of, being flirtatious and having those types of relationships. She is, to us as readers, smart and thoughtful, and she's sexy. And even if she doesn't fully realize it. So she's also a plus size woman, and that comes up here and there in her own, self-conscious. But her husband, her late husband, loved her exactly how she was. Why did it take so long for Muriel to kind of come into her own and see that sexiness? And, did she come to terms with her body as her confidence in her future grew?
So one thing that is in the book is that Muriel had a mother who was very unkind to her about her body. And it sort of put her through this torture of diets on which she could not lose weight because, as we know more and more about the science behind weight, calories in, calories out is a gross simplification. It doesn't work for all people. Some people just have a set point that's bigger than what a lot of people think is, I'm gonna like put in air quotes, the desirable body. And she was very lucky to meet Harold when she's quite young. She's only 18 when she meets him. And she is already aware that she's a pretty sexual person. So she's lucky to meet this soulmate early. And she sort of has this marriage that's kind of a haven. So it's great, but it also has, in a sense, delayed her from really thinking about who is she when she's not with Harold. And, the fact that he's been gone for 10 years and she's sort of been avoiding men, she's a little bit scared of her own sexuality. She's of an age, she would have been born in the late 50s, where the messaging around women and sex was so contradictory. And there was still, I know this hasn't changed that much. I have a teenage daughter, but, very complicated ideas about slut shaming and who's good, who's bad. And she's just put off thinking about this. And then finds out rather happily in her late 60s that that part of her is not over, far from it, and that she has a real desire for sex and love and romance, but most of all, she wants to develop friendships. She wants to meet people and get out more. And she realized that her world was so small that with her husband dead and her daughter and her family now moving to Japan, where she cannot live with them because it's just not going to be feasible, she's like, I mean, the term she actually uses in the book is, I need a deeper bench. I need, I've got my buddy from grade school, but I need more people in my life. And she even realizes that maybe she'd like a little more adventure in her life.
Yeah, absolutely. She was expanding her horizons in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
I want to ask you a little bit more about that friendship aspect you were talking about, because in many ways, this book to me is an ode to friendships, both old and new. And I don't want to give anything away, but that was kind of a particularly interesting part of this book. But as you were talking about her longtime friend, they've been friends for decades and decades and decades. But can you talk about, is it harder to make friends as we get older? Or is it easier because now we're not worried about a number? We might be worried about interests and chemistry. What do you think?
So I'll just speak from my own personal experience. Mrs. Blossom and I line up in some unusual ways. I'm not timid. I'm not shy. Unlike Mrs. Blossom, I've been upgraded a lot. But 5 years ago, my marriage ended, which wasn't what I was expecting, but so it goes. And it was right as the pandemic was happening. So that was just almost a surreal thing. But then as time went on, I realized, wow, I have a lot of friends. And my friends it's like saving sounds too dramatic, but boy, did they prop me up in the early days when I was just kind of confused and overwhelmed. And I realized that I not only have a lot of friends, I have friends of many ages. Um, Technology has been good to me in terms of helping me keep certain friendships thriving, because a lot of my friends are writer friends who aren't here in Baltimore. But I just became convinced that friendship was more important than anything else I could think of, and that I it would have been easy after, being shut up in the house for a while. And I'm never lonely. I'm just never lonely. I'm really good in my own company. And I could probably sit in my house with my kid for the rest of my life and be fine. But it's better, I think, to have these friendships. And it made me resolve to just work that much harder at showing up for my friends, because they really showed up for me when I needed them. And so now, you know, I've wrestled most of my adult life with how good of a friend am I? I feel like I have let some people down. So I'm always trying to be better on that score. And, again, not to give anything away, romance is lovely, romance is nice. Everybody likes a romance in a book. And, certainly Mrs. Blossom does get to flirt with more than one guy. But this book is an ode to friendship, absolutely. And about making sure that just one friend can't be everything to you. That's a lot to put on one person. And so Mrs. Blossom is learning that she's going to have to make more friends. And I don't think it's easy for her, but she gains a lot of confidence over the course of the book and begins to value her own company.
Yeah. I love what you said, and I can identify with a lot of what you said. And I was thinking throughout this story that as we get older and maybe some circumstances have maybe humbled us or brought us to our knees, there's something about making friends at that point where you just lay yourself bare and you're not worried about how people perceive you. It's just about, do we have a connection? And it's almost like going back to your high school reunion, at the 5 year mark versus the 25-year mark, right? Everybody's been humbled by that point.
I mean, I do like that idea. And again, I think we have to be aware that friendship is not something that does not require effort. I think we make a mistake to think of friendship as being effortless. And if you have to work at it, are you really friends? And I also recognize that some friendships aren't going to last forever. That's very natural. I was trying to explain to my daughter that when I worked at the newspaper, I sat next to people that I genuinely liked. I talked to them every day. I knew everything about their lives. And then if my desk was moved, I would just never talk to that person anymore. We didn't actually have anything in common other than where we sat in the newsroom. I mean, these are like really likable, cool, nice people, but that was the kind of friendship we had there. And I have to tell you, my mom friends are just the best. I live in a neighborhood in South Baltimore where probably about 5 years before I became a mom, the other moms and dads really decided to kind of roll their sleeves up and make our local schools good. And they did that. And so this used to be a neighborhood where people moved in their 20s. There are lots of bars. It's very fun. Moved in their 20s, got married, had a kid, moved out. And all of a sudden, there were a lot of people who were like, I don't want to move out. I want to live in this city. And so these women are just my heroes. And they have been so good to me. They really look out for me. And, one in particular is just always checking in, like, do you want to come over for beef stew? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And if I say no, I'm like, I know I'm saying no a lot, but please never stop asking. I'm just very busy right now. But I love that you ask, and I love that you're thinking of me.
Beautiful.
I hope they listen to this and hear that, because that's really sweet. But and I really enjoy hearing your perspective and Mrs. Blossom's perspective on friendship, because I'm under 30, so I have like a decade where friendships were falling off, like dropping like flies and changing. And I have yet to look forward to a long-term career friendship or my mom friends or things like that. And things like this and having these types of discussions gives me hope. So it is really an ode because it kind of tells you what you have to look forward to.
I mean, it's definitely something I'm ever more open to. And I think some people think you're going to narrow as you get older, but I watched my own mother. My mother died last year, unfortunately, but she had a pretty great life, lived to 93. And it was about 2.5 years ago, she finally had to move into like continuing care. She was in great health, but living 3 hours away from me in a small beach town was just not practical anymore. So she moved back to Baltimore. She made all these new friends. When my mom died, I was in tears over the notes that I got from people who had met her in the past 2 years and knew so much about her. And my mom was like joining committees and going to the ball games and going to theater. I mean, she saw her life. I mean, it's very much, I know, I think it was you, Julia, who talked about expanding horizons. And this is a book that I think probably literally at some point uses the phrase about, you know, Mrs. Blossom seeing her life getting bigger and not smaller, that she's seeing so much potential and possibility. I mean, you can't argue with the math that by the time you're in your 60s, you're in your third act. But life as a narrative isn't structured like a classic 3-act story. So there's no reason you can't have more fun, that you can't meet new people. I mean, you're it's not a book. You're not closing it down. You can actually open it up. And, I'm certainly trying to live that way myself. Mrs. Blossom has inspired me a lot. As a matter of fact, she was a good character for me to spend the last 2 years with.
And on that note, she was the main character of this book. And I think in the past you wrote that she was a supporting character and this was her time to shine,
She
which I
was
thought
a
was awesome.
she appears in, I believe it's two of the Tess Monahan mysteries, of which there are about a dozen. And I don't think I did right by her. I feel a little bit chagrined. The Tess Monahan books were written from the POV of Tess Monahan, who's much younger than Mrs. Blossom and meets her at a time when, she doesn't have kids. She doesn't. I realize that Tess, and therefore I, um, is a little ageist. And that I had really been unfair to this character and kind of played her for laughs. And I thought, I would like to do right by her. I think I owe her a book. And, part of it is that the first time I wrote about Mrs. Blossom, it was more than 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago. There is a really big gap in our ages. And I don't feel great about the failure of my imagination to see this older character, a shy widow. I mean, I knew enough to realize that she would always have this natural aptitude for surveillance and being a private investigator. But I sure changed her in some ways, and moving her to the center of a book. Again, this is a very overt conversation in the book where Mrs. Blossom meets someone who's like, you need to be the main character in your own life. And it's good advice.
Absolutely. I like the arc that she took and how that followed the natural progression of kind of your relationship with her, because it made sense and it kind of showed that, maybe it didn't occur that she was the main character in her own life. And for so long, she was with a husband for a while and she kind of had that partnership. And here she is on her own, trying to figure out, who she is without a relationship or anything like that. But she hadn't thought about it until this point in her life. And why do you think that sometimes it takes somebody pointing out that you haven't been acting as the main character that you are in your own life? And why do some people feel content being a supporting role and staying in that way. Because it didn't seem like Mrs. Blossom was content once she started to get the ball rolling.
Once she glimpsed the possibilities available to her, look, women in our culture, maybe more now than recently, people love it when we're supporting characters. People love women who, or some people, mainly men, to be the wife of, to be the mother of. There's such a conversation going on around right now around marriage and how well does it really work for women? And is it working for women? Or is it actually doing more work for capitalism? If you really think about how marriage works in the US. And so Mrs. Blossom kind of happily signed on to, she didn't like being the daughter of the woman she was the daughter of, but she liked very much being the wife of, and she liked being the mother of. Those things were important to her. She loses her role as the wife of. And then she doesn't lose her role as the mother and the grandmother of, but she's less needed. So these traditional roles, the way she defined herself, were taken away from her. And it's like, then who are you? If you've identified yourself this way. And, I became a mom really late in life. I was 51 when my daughter was born. So I've got a teenager living with me right now, and I love it. And I'm very aware that right around the time I'm Miss Blossom's age, I'm going to be an empty nester. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about how will I prepare for that? Because unlike Mrs. Blossom, I'm not very flirtatious and I'm not interested in men right now. I don't know if it'll ever change again, but so I'm not dating. I don't ever want to marry again. I don't ever want to live with, another person except my kid ever again. So I'm trying to think about, okay, what will I do when my horizon, I'm going to treat that as horizons widening. And what I keep telling people is that I want to travel as much as I can before I'm too old to do it. My mom was a librarian who was married to a journalist. My dad and I worked at the same newspaper for part of my career. And so they were Depression era people, middle class through and through. They socked away so much money. And when my mom died and, I was her executor and I took over everything, I was like, Mom, I wish you had spent so much more of this money on just like one great trip a year. Because my mom did love to travel. As a matter of fact, after I took a trip very much like Mrs. Blossom's trip is research. And when I came back, my mom said, could I go on a trip like that? Do I have the mobility to do it? I was like, oh, absolutely you do. And we were talking about doing like a 3-generation cruise or a trip like that, where we wouldn't have to worry so much about, she was in good shape, but, she wasn't going to be walking 10 miles a day. And I just hate that my mom, out of her conscientiousness and her wonderful frugality, I was like, but you could have taken one good trip every year. We could have done this. Back when I was still married, and now it's probably 8-9 years ago, my then husband had a speaking engagement in Copenhagen. I was teaching in Italy, and I don't remember how this happened, but the whole family, my husband, my stepson's girlfriend, my stepson's mother, so my ex's ex-wife, and my mother, we all converged on Copenhagen together.
Oh
and
my God.
We took my mom to Noma, the really famous restaurant there. My mom was just having the time of her life. She was so thrilled. We had so much fun in Copenhagen. And I wish, there's a lot in this Mrs. Blossom book where it's like, this is like a fantasy that I had for my mom, and also that I have for my sister, who doesn't travel at all. My sister is so much an inspiration. Mrs. Blossom she's been married now for 40 years, I believe.
Wow.
And I don't remember the last time my sister was on an airplane, but it's over 20 years ago. And she has Parkinson's, and unfortunately, she's now in assisted living in a memory care unit. But Mrs. Blossom's love of music is taken directly from my sister. My sister had the most avant-garde taste in music and had this record collection to die for. And so in writing about this shy but bright and curious person, a lot of that was there's a lot of tribute to my mother and my sister in this book, which is why it's dedicated to them.
That's beautiful. And, I think a lot of people will identify with Mrs. Blossom in other ways too, because as you pointed out, she's negotiating a new normal as a parent of adult children who are making their decisions and who have a separate life. And that's a whole nother transition that we've got to, make as adults who have children. And I loved watching her consider, what is my role? Where do I fit in?
Where do I belong? What should I be doing? And it's been interesting. I've had some conversations around the fact that I think a local journalist said to me, "Why did you make her rich? Why did you give her a lottery ticket?" And I said, I just thought it would be more fun that way. and again, that's a little bit autobiographical, because when I was married, my husband worked in television. So even though I do fine as a writer, I was married to someone who made so much more money than I did that I didn't even really think about money. I was just like, it was just sort of, and then we got divorced and I was given a settlement, which was, at once fair and generous. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in charge of the money now. I have to be attentive to this. And on the one hand, it's a very good settlement, and, no one would feel the least bit sorry for me having been given this money, but it's an enormous responsibility. And so I actually think Mrs. Blossom could be a good role model for me. I think she's a little bit more sensible about money than I am.
But that's why we need friends. And that's why we need friends like Mrs. Blossom, because, you're right. They come alongside you. They're a sounding board, and we can see how their choices turned out. Maybe do them differently or better. I don't know. But that's how you feel reading your book. You feel like you're getting a glimpse into her life. We're living it with her, and we're blossoming in some way, right?
I love that.
It's wonderful. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And first of all, I want to thank you because you've shared so many important parts of your life and how they went into this character. I know that the readers are going to absolutely enjoy that, especially having a little bit more of the background. And I want to tell them how to get in touch with you. You have a fantastic website. It's lauralippman.com with 2 P's. You post letters to your readers. You've got all kinds of interesting links and, of course, to your books. I know they're going to want to read it. And Julie, why don't you show that beautiful cover again so that people can see this one? Because this is the one coming out, and we're very, very excited for you. We want to thank you, and we wish you all the best with this wonderful book.
Thank you so much for your interest and your care. I really appreciated the questions you asked today. They were so thoughtful and just so tuned into the book.
Thank you so much. We hope you come back in the future too.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I really appreciated her candor and the background and just the things that she offered up to kind of give us, context for what's a fun story. And now we kind of know where that inspiration comes from. And I love having the background. That makes all the difference for me as a reader.
I agree. And also this is a character too that she's got additional dimensions to her that, maybe a lot of protagonists don't in crime fiction. So I think that's kind of cool because we're getting to know her on this deeper level as a friend. And that's pretty inspiring and pretty cool. Well, I want to tell our listeners about some other exciting authors that we have coming up. We have a very long list, so I'm trying to condense it to just a few. But we have Maggie Stiefvater with The Listeners, Chanel Cleeton, The Lost Story of Eva Fuentes, Caroline Fraser with Murderland. That's one of our nonfiction books. Phenomenal. Susan Wiggs with Wayward Girls. We have Christina Baker Klein and Ann Burt who have teamed up, both of whom have been on the show, with Please Don't Lie. Alma Katsu with Fiend. And listeners, we just ask that you keep sharing our socials. You can find us all over the place on Instagram, on X, on YouTube. We're also at our website at bookstormpodcast.com. But we're grateful for you, and we know why you keep tuning in. It's because your favorite authors are here.